This is Carla Langhorst. I'm one of the co-founders of Small Business Solver. Today we're going to be talking about the top pitfalls to avoid, and this is extremely important. I think that knowing what not to do is actually just as important, if not more important, than what to do. And a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today, I wish I had known when I first started my own company. And some of the information, not only is it from online research as well as our own experience, as well as speaking with hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs actually, but we've also done some research through Stats Canada and also some primary research through the United Church of Canada on the social enterprise and community outreach side. So all of these findings are going to be in today's presentation. So what to expect? Basically, we're going to be talking about what failure rates are actually out there, so what's happening. Then who is starting up a business, so what are the industries and what are the growth rates that you can expect. Then we're going to dig down into why it's been successful in some areas versus others, what are the things to be avoiding. And then if you're a nonprofit or social enterprise, so it could still be a for-profit but have some sort of social altruistic delivery out there, there's also some other things to be thinking about that are a little bit more niche. But again, we'll try and keep this in about 15 minutes and we'll move forward. So first off, failure rates. Really the key thing here is that it's not actually the 90% that we think it is, or it's not even the 50% that we think it is. I think I've heard, old wives' tales that 50% of businesses fail in the first year, and that's simply not true. It's actually 80% in the first year are successful. So not failing, successful. So we flip it around, it's only about 20-21% that actually fail. And what's the difference between a regular small business and a micro business? A micro business basically has less than 5 employees. So it's actually not as bad as we thought it was. It should actually be higher. Year 2, success rate is still at 72% for small businesses. But for micro business, it's so less than 5 employees, it's 68%. It's actually only in year 5 where these numbers finally go down to 50. So it's actually not as bad as we think. In fact, bankruptcy doesn't happen also as often as we think. So these are things that I think we're always thinking, oh no, the failure rate's so high. But in actuality, they're not as bad as everyone's telling us to. So just having that presence of mind to understand that and realize that, you know what, there's a lot of hope out there. It's not easy. We have to really, really bust our butts, but it's not as bad out there as we think it is. And in fact, it's only about 5% of closures, or less than 5 actually, that declare bankruptcy. And in 2012, and that's an average of 7,000 businesses declaring that since I think it was 2001 is when these stats, so the average is 7,000 businesses a year. But in 2012, that actually was lower. It was half that amount at 3,200. So bankruptcy is really not as common as we think, so it's not something we have to be as worried about. In terms of the Canadian landscape, in terms of what's happening out there, just so you know, we're not alone. Again, there's over 1 million small businesses in Canada, so we are a huge part of this. And actually, if we're breaking it down by number of employees, the micro businesses is actually 55% of small businesses out there. So kind of just showing what the landscape is. And so when we're looking at failures, who are we talking about here? And even more incredibly, I think, is less than 20 employees is at 87% of the businesses out there. So where does small business impact? Well, where are we in and where are we seeing success? Well, we're seeing success in agriculture, health, other services, education, construction, accommodation, food services, professional services, and retail. And really, after that point in time, we're less than 50%, so finance is still pretty high in admin. But, in small business and wholesale, arts and entertainment, transportation, and the rest here, it doesn't seem to be as good of a fit. So even right off the bat, we can kind of look for industries that have a higher chance of success and where we're seeing a bigger impact for small businesses. And that's why this slide would be relevant for us. And then the other thing, just, naturally understanding what's actually already working out there. Well, 57% of small businesses are in Quebec and Ontario. That's not really a big deal, though, for us across Canada because really there's a larger population in those areas. So the more interesting one, I think, is that the largest per capita small business startups are actually in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and PEI. So just even knowing that if you're in these areas, that's something that's more common or not. Canada versus international. Are we actually successful versus international? And why could that be? And really, we're kind of middle of the road if we're looking at this. So for services and manufacturing, we're kind of at only 3% of our businesses are extremely high growth. And we can compare this to all these other ones here. So Sweden has very high growth services. Hungary does as well. Netherlands again, and the United States has a focus on the manufacturing side. So just seeing where we are versus everyone else. And it's probably because historically we're a little bit more risk averse. And Canada actually has over 90% of our businesses are actually franchises. So because we're risk adverse, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. But a lot of small businesses start marketing outside of Canada to actually grow at a faster pace. So this is also kind of a learning and interesting. If you're looking at being on the successful side of things, there's certain industries in Canada that actually stand a better chance of being successful or being in the high growth sectors. And if we're looking at this, really construction, through the roof. Professional and scientific technical services, through the roof here. Transportation and warehousing also has the high upside. So even looking at slides like this and understanding stats, if you're thinking of starting up a business or if you're even in any of these industries, what's happening there already and where can you have high growth? Now, here's the key ones that I know we're all really looking at, and this is what we're most excited about learning about today, and it's all the key pitfalls. And so, like I said, knowing what not to do is more important or as important as a minimum of what to do. And these are the top 5 things that through online research and really through hearing examples from entrepreneurs that we identified as the top 5 things to be avoiding. And the very number one thing is the burnout on the expenses. So personal expenses seem to be something that really, really, really can drag someone from not being able to continue sustaining their small business. And the reason being is, let's say you have, starting your cell phone bill, or let's say you have a nice car and you have lease payments, or let's say you have a big mortgage. Well, you might actually only give yourself 6 months amount of time in order to show that you can be successful. Well, maybe in 6 months of time, you've burned through so much money and you really haven't seen the success to actually sustain it that it's actually your personal expenses, and it has nothing to do with your business acumen or your business idea of whether or not your business is going to float. The neat thing is that I've seen some entrepreneurs actually use this tactic to motivate them. So they might actually buy a new car, or they might get a bigger house with a bigger mortgage to incent them. That's not something that I necessarily at all recommend. I've seen it. I've actually seen it work. So that's the other side of this. But conversely, really, the easiest time to be starting a small business is when your personal expenses are low. So if you don't have a family, if you don't have a mortgage, if you don't have an expensive car, these types of things, they can actually hinder your business quite a bit. So when you're looking at starting a business, are there personal expenses that you're willing to give up at the forefront, at the get-go, at the beginning? So start keeping your own life a little bit leaner, so a little bit less expensive, and it actually will help your small business. So the second thing is basically cost analysis. And this is the whole concept that we often make assumptions when we're building our financial projections. Sometimes we're assuming we're going to have a ton of sales, and maybe we only hit our projections about 50%. Well, that does happen, but the one that really gets us as well are the cost analysis. So maybe we think it's only going to cost us in our raw materials X amount, or maybe we think the website we want to design will only cost us $1,000, and it turns out to cost us $5,000. So the initial cost analysis, that's something that we want to spend extra time in. In fact, the best practice here is to research in depth, to the penny, the top 5 biggest cost drivers. So the top 5 largest costs that you see coming down the pipeline for your business, you should be spending extra time on making sure that you're right. And don't assume that part. So bad assumptions on cost analysis can really, really hurt a company. The third one really happens often when a company starts growing, and that's the bad hires. I would say 9 times out of 10 from what I've seen and stories I've heard, it is the first hire is often a small business owner's worst hire. And that happens for many reasons. Number 1, they hire family. Number 2, they hire a friend. Number 3, they actually hire the first person that they interview because they're so desperate, because they're so busy that they just need someone. So there's all these things that we really want to be avoiding. We do have a webinar entitled Who to Hire that walks through this process to make sure we're doing this right and avoiding this. So definitely take a look at that one. I'll cross-reference them on the blog so you can see both of them. So bad hires is the third common pitfall, because what happens is all of a sudden that drains your business of a lot of cash flow. You might have paid 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months salary for someone, and then you realize that they haven't brought any benefit. So that's thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands of dollars out the door without any return. Number 4 is getting ahead of what you're ready for. And so there's not only small businesses, but medium and large-sized businesses that have actually grown too fast. They've grown without having the infrastructure, they've grown without having a credit line, and they've grown without having sustainable income coming at the same time. So let's say you start investing in some infrastructure, but there's a change in the economy, or the sales forecast wasn't hit bang on, it was just a little bit less. But if you're growing at such a massive rate and you're investing so much, you can't afford those blips at that point in time. So taking a little bit slower, making sure that you're actually ready for it, making sure that you have almost leveled cash flow, so you have something that's consistently coming in, that's what starts to really allow you to grow, as opposed to getting ahead of what you're actually ready for. And the 5th one here is losing focus. Often the reason that we start our own business is that we are dreamers and we have great ideas and we're always ready for the next thing. And often that's great for founding a company. But to start growing a company and keep it growing, often we have to be more consistent. We've seen many times where larger businesses switch from one thing to another and it's not successful. And yet if you stay more consistent, your customers get it, they trust you more, and they like it. One great example of that is Tim Hortons' Roll Up the Rim to Win. That promotion has been around for many, many years. And because of that, everyone expects it, everyone gets it, and it's consistent, and you trust it. And that type of idea actually falls in line with your own business strategy. So is your marketing consistent? Is your taglines consistent? Are you actually continuing to deliver the same types of products and services? If you change every month, it's kind of confusing, and it takes up a lot of your time and management time in order to keep on making those tweaks and changing. So as an overview again, the top 5 are: number 1, personal expenses. What can you reduce? Because if your personal expenses are high, you're giving your business less chance of success because you don't give it enough of a run rate at the beginning. Number 2, cost analysis. Are you making assumptions that you shouldn't be making? Number 3, bad hires. Taking the time on the first hire is critical. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, I've seen the first hire not be a great one. So spend the time. It's not worth it. Number 4, getting ahead of what you're ready for. So making sure that you're growing at a rate that's sustainable. Sometimes you're going to have to say no. And number 5, losing focus. At the beginning, the first 6 months, I understand we're always almost willing to, make money anywhere for almost any product or service, but there comes a point where you have to really start to narrow that down and focus. If we're a nonprofit, just really quickly on this one, is that these are actually the 4 stages that you should be focusing on as a nonprofit. A lot of nonprofits, they start with the financial stability side of things, but the key is to actually start with whatever the volunteers are passionate about and making sure that you have a base of volunteers. Then you start worrying about financial stability. Then you start worrying about innovation and staying flexible and adaptive. And then the last piece is actually social justice, so making sure that the relationship between you and the people that you serve is equal. In order to do this, 2 best practices for nonprofits, and this has been provided by the United Church of Canada, are both partners in collaboration and feedback. And again, this report I'll also post on the blog, so this will be available for you as well. As a wrap-up, we talked about the actual failure rates, understanding what's actually happening, and so where there might actually be opportunity within the Canadian environment. Then we talked about the 5 common pitfalls and the nonprofit side of things. And I think I promised that it was going to be 15 minutes, so the top pitfalls to avoid are hopefully just a little bit smaller to you now. And I'm at an end. I wanted to keep it nice and simple for everybody, and I am going to stop the recording. So